Okay, well, that just leaves me to welcome to the podcast this week two people I know well and one person I haven't met before, but he seems to think that he knows me.
Yeah, from
So,
somewhere.
Jake Chessum, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having us, Grant.
Chris, welcome.
Hi, hello. Good to see you again.
And James, welcome.
Nice to meet you, Grant. I
And
think I
you.
have met you, but.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm going to put that in the hands of my lawyer.
Yeah.
Now, we come together for this podcast. First time we've done a four-way, um, but we've come together for a reason, really, which is that you've come together with a project, with something you're doing, which I think is really interesting, particularly around archives, and it's called Farringdon. Is that right, Jake?
Yeah, Farringdon Print Shop in reference to our kind of shared heritage from the early mid to late 90s of shooting in London, and all the studios and labs seem to be around Farringdon. So
So
that's where
let's kick that off, shall we? Let's spend a little bit of time on talking about photography in London in the 90s. Who wants to kick off? What was it like?
I'll let
so I
one.
go
I'll let one of
first.
you boys. Yeah, you were there before me.
Well, I mean, an amazing time. I think it was the kind of heyday and the last major hurrah for editorial. And I don't know. Obviously, Chris, James, and I were part of a kind of burgeoning group of younger photographers who were trying to make it and start out with different backgrounds and different beginnings, but all of us gravitated towards the same kind of publications. And it was a time when I think you could shoot, we got to shoot young up and coming people who quite quickly became immensely famous. And so we suddenly had a portfolio full of interesting people who were being talked about and being seen. And, gradually over the following few years, that led to us being able to work internationally, because I think, again, New York was looking to London for interesting voices, interesting, takes on things. So we all started shooting internationally as well. So it was a kind of, I don't know, I think at the time it was hard to see any perspective in it, because I think we were so in it and so kind of quietly ambitious, if you will, that it was hard to see it, in a perspective which now I think, coming back to it all these years later, suddenly I think we've got a much clearer view of what we were part of and how good it was. I think at the time we all felt we were really, struggling and it was painful and everything, but actually, so many of us, those guys who were and girls who were working around that time, actually forged long-term careers from kind of humble beginnings, working for free for, the Face, Arena, that kind of publication.
Yeah,
Jake?
I remember. I came in a few years later, but yeah, it's like all of us are just like scrambling around the same sort of like doing the same, trying to do the same meetings, going to the same studios, and just rubbing shoulders with all these people. And you would turn up and you'd shoot somebody like as Jake said, who's like some up and coming sort of person, and some of them made it, some of them didn't, and like we look back on it now, and it's like, oh, like I had a classic one for the Face where they sent me to Sweden for like an hour to shoot some young soap star, and it's only 20 years later when I dig out a box that I realised it was Rebecca Ferguson, and it's like it's kind of funny, but I mean we're all sort of bumbling about and just like trying to get through it, and yeah, it's and now we look back on it.
It's very hard to overstate the significance of the physical world as well in that time versus the digital world that we live and
Yeah.
work in now, which is and really the center, the focal point of that physical world was probably the film lab. Is that you would spend a huge amount of time going in and out of film labs, dropping film off, waiting for film to be developed, waiting to collect film, going back to have it printed, waiting for it to be printed.
I mean, yeah.
And yeah, I'll just say that that's where I met so many people just through that one thing alone, which and that doesn't exist now. The concept of the film lab as a kind of communal space.
I mean, yeah, I have to say that's how I met. I think both of you. I mean, I specifically remember how I met Jake, I mean, I'm a, not to say I'm the spring chicken here, but I'm a couple of years younger. But I turned up and I was desperately trying to get the free job, because back in the day, the only way to get your foot in the door was to work for free at a studio, and then gain apprenticeship to work with like a photographer and stuff. So I was like banging on doors, and I think I bumped into Jake in Farringdon on the street, and he asked me what I was doing. I was trying to get in. I think it was Metro at the time. I was trying to get a job there, Metro Studios, and he very kindly gave me the name and number of somebody running a different studio, and they gave me my first free job. And and then it cut to 25 years later, and now I'm still sat here chatting to him. So
what studio was that?
That was the Works.
Oh, did you work at the Works? I worked at the Works.
See, we all like this is
I got
sacked. The human touch.
Well, before we get that story, because obviously we all worked at the Works, because that was one of the main studios we used to use. I mean, interestingly enough, you talk about the physical. I mean, Jake and I were actually at St. Martin's together, and he was the year below me. And I remember him turning up or maybe I asked him to go and photograph a girl in Hyde Park with a bag, in the very early days.
I remember that clearly. And I mean, something that touches upon, again, like leads in from what Chris and James just said, is how much more social photography was. It wasn't just the lab. It was, meeting with art directors, meeting with photo editors, going in to a magazine for an appointment and trying to stay there for as long as possible to see and meet somebody who might give you a job, and now, and again, not that people come to me that often asking me for career advice, but it's a different world. It's really hard to advise anyone starting out today how to do it, because the way we did it, again, doesn't exist anymore. The kind of social
schmoozing
about it. Yeah.
Really having to learn how to schmooze, how to be interesting, how to be the kind of person that they want to have around.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that was it. You had to show willing to do whatever for photographers or whatever you needed to do, and for them to pay attention and to see you there. And it was like in and out of studios, labs, even the pubs next door was great. You'd have to run in and out with boxes of contact sheets to drop them off to somebody, and it's the good old days.
The Three Kings in Clerkenwell Close was one I always remember.
Was that where Jono was?
What's that?
Was that with Jono? Was that Jono?
Yeah, the LTI, Jono's.
Yeah.
When I think of the people I met in LTI/Jono's, I met Elaine Constantine in there. I met Steve Hyatt, Nick Knight a few times. An unbelievable cast of people, really, to be around, to be exposed to and spend time with. It was cool.
Whilst we're in this kind of world of nostalgia, I'm just going to let it run for a little bit, but maybe take us into some slightly dark waters. That is that I recently wrote a book about my time through the 90s at VODCAST, and it was a history of VODCAST, but I dealt with that time. And I think that what I'd always thought, and maybe you guys did too, was that the 1960s was the time when all the fun happened, and that's when everything was super exciting to be a photographer and so forth. And when I started to actually write about the 90s, I suddenly started to have a bit of a pang of conscience and realized just how badly behaved we actually all were. And also how that period was I think, fundamentally the most exciting decade. Chris, I'm going to throw it back to you, because I reckon you were probably part of a lot of that bad behavior.
He was a ringleader.
I was never really badly behaved. I saw lots of bad behavior, but I never instigated or partook in or of it. I think what I was going to say actually was, I think the 60s was the template by which people lived in the 90s, because I'm born in 1968. I grew up really, a lot of the photography that was my first kind of the first things that exposed me to photography, all that, Bailey, Donovan, Duffy, Irving Penn, Richard Avedon, You know, all these people, Melvin Sokolsky, all these people who inspired and excited me were from the 60s. And so I think we looked to that decade as the benchmark, the gold standard of how great it could be. And I think growing up in the 80s in the suburbs of London, how boring it was and how seemingly dead everything had become. And then I think by about, I can remember like 92, 93, just thinking, oh, it's never going to be as good as that was. You know, it's never going to be as great as that. This is rubbish. You know, another Brit Awards where Annie Lennox wins Best Female Artist again. You know, and then a year later, you have all this stuff. You know, Blur, Oasis, Train Spotting. You know, all those things come along, and suddenly it just kind of, you know, it was sort of it just lit up, didn't it? And but when you're in that, living in it, I don't think you're really conscious of it in the moment. You know, although I do have a very clear memory of going to see Oasis at the Marquee, you know, and thinking, wow, this is really something, you know.
Jake, does that chime with you with your Pearly roots?
Yeah. Yeah, my South London, Purley, Croydon, Jesus. Yeah, it was something. I mean, I think Chris and James would say the same thing. It was something that we were aware that we wanted to get out of, and I think the career choices that we made and were able to achieve led us to the kind of excitement and stuff that we hadn't really planned or thought could happen. I mean, I remember, like Chris says, like 94, 95, suddenly I was getting, you know, flown to LA to shoot the Beastie Boys in Mike D's backyard. You know, I was, my first ad job was shooting Kate Moss at the Works. As you said, you know, suddenly we were doing stuff that, because I think because you saw it and your friends and the people you kind of thought were cool would see it, and you'd see the face, you'd see the magazine that you would, you know, I'd always wanted to work for the Face, and suddenly I was working for the Face, and I was so excited to do that. I think it was, again, I don't want to be a downer, but I feel it was always tempered by that slight panic and anxiety about making a living and what was somebody else doing. And it was hard to learn to kind of shut some of that noise out about other people and focus on your own aesthetic, your own career, your own direction. But no, it was incredible, and the stuff we did in those years, yeah, it doesn't happen anymore. I was flown out to South Central LA to shoot Ice Cube. It was the first time I ever went to LA, and that was something that came out of nowhere. You know, I got a call from Lee at the Face. He's like, "Do you want to go to the worst area of LA?" I'm like, "Yeah, why not?" You know, and suddenly I was, you know, on the street with Ice Cube, and obviously we got mugged for all our stuff once we parked up on Melrose. All our gear got stolen out of the car. Mostly, I'd taken the film with me. But yeah, it was an incredible time, and like anything, like I think Chris alluded to, and you, Grant, as well. It's like now we're looking back at it through the rose-tinted spectacles a little bit, but yeah, it was a phenomenal time and an amazing thing to grow up through.
There was also there were also the budgets were there that enable people like us to go to South Central LA or New York, or I went to Melbourne with the Manic Street Preachers for 3 days once and came back again.
Yeah. I think that's it. The record industry actually had money back then, didn't they? And they would, I had silly ones. I did Sydney and back in 48 hours, and it's just, you just the stuff that I think, as Jake was saying as well, like when you're in it and you're struggling and the noise around you, because oh no, so and so's shooting this and they're shooting that, and it's only now, as like, you know, as grumpy old men, we can sit down and go, oh, we actually had it really amazing, really, to be able to, you know, to go back and look at what we did, and you know, so I mean, that again, not to harp on about the founder thing, but that's part of the ethos of that, is that we get to reminisce as well as dig out old pictures and stuff. Because
we also lived at the tail end of this sort of great arc of print, the power of print media, which, if you say, goes from probably about the 1920s, I would say, to the 90s, really, to, you know, and everything. I can remember going to the Perpignan, which was the big annual sort of photojournalism festival where all the photojournalists go, obviously. And meeting someone there who had worked at Life magazine in the 60s and being unbelievably jealous of the stories that this guy told me of his time working at Life in the 60s. That the one I remember the most was the story of someone that was they'd gone off to do a story on an African dictator. And as part of the story, they ended up going through several African countries in pursuit of this story. And the fastest way to travel from one place to another was to hire a boat to take him down the Nile. And when he came back, his expenses claim was literally written on a piece of paper, and it just said "trip down Nile, $25,000." You know, and the expenses person at Life was just like, oh, "Okay, I'll deal with that." You know, and I remember hearing stories like that and just thinking, oh, you know, where you would, you know, people in this who would want to do a story on Frank Sinatra. That's the classic one. Yeah, I want to write about Frank Sinatra. Yeah, okay, take 6 months. You know, and they go off and do that, you know, and we sort of had the very, very last knockings of that, I think.
Well, I think, you know, being somebody who's worn many hats, but two hats I have worn is one being an art director and being the one who had to deal with your expenses, budgets, and giving you the freedom to go and do the work, as well as obviously as a photographer. But I think you raise an interesting point there, because whilst we're talking about this, there was an incredible talent amongst the world of art directing and commissioning as well. There were some great people out there who did give photographers a hell of a lot of freedom. I mean, I could tell story after story after story. £23,000 for a one-day shoot of Janet Jackson, anybody? She brought her own florist. Why wouldn't you? So, you know, what's your feeling about that environment and the space you were given by the people who commissioned you? Maybe I'm going to pick on you first, Jake, because hopefully you're going to say nice things about me.
No, always. Why would I not? No, it was. I mean, I feel like in terms of the budgets and stuff like that, I feel like I'm foolish that I never took the Mickey, if you will. I was always really cautious and didn't go insane for fear of not getting it back. But yeah, I feel that the commissioning process, and again, it's all in retrospect, it was much more sensible than I realized at the time, and much more conscious and based, I think, upon, you know, you met us and you talked to us and you would think, okay, this would, you do well with this person, you do well with that person. And I think a lot of times that did work out. And, you know, going back to what Chris said about the stories of things that happened in the 60s, I think, you know, we have the stories. And I think that's part and parcel of the reminiscence and looking back at the pictures, is remembering, you know, what happened on the shoot, how did it happen, how was the meeting like. And again, I know Grant and I have been conversing recently about this shoot. Grant commissioned me to shoot David Bowie in 1995, which, again, you know, it was one day nearly 30 years ago. And we both, I don't know about him, but I still encounter that photo and think about it probably on a weekly basis, maybe more often, especially around this time of year on the anniversary of his death. But, you know, that was an amazing opportunity. And, you know, I'm so grateful to Grant for giving me that shot and that opportunity, not just to get a picture, but to meet somebody who I'd idolized and, you know, was central to my growing up in the 80s and 90s. So I think, sorry, I'm losing my way a little, Grant.
No, that's all right. You've suddenly been transported back to a terrace house in Fulham.
Yeah, no, it's true. You know, the memories and the kind of the you know, again, bringing it around, you know, sadly again to the Farringdon Print Shop kind of idea, is that it is about pulling together the stories. And I've talked to Chris about this as well in the past. You know, the idea of selling a print or somebody wanting to buy an image is they're not just necessarily buying that picture, they're buying their sense of connection to it, as well as the photographer's input in that, the stories around that shoot. Like, they want to know, like, what was it like to meet so-and-so? What was it like when you were on your way to the shoot? Tell me about the shoot. Tell me a story about the shoot. And that all adds, you know, aesthetic value to that moment, which was fleeting. A lot of those shoots, Chris talks about the 6 months with Frank Sinatra. I feel like I'm not alone here. Most of us, we were lucky to get 20 minutes with somebody, and I learned an immense amount from you, Grant. Not to blow smoke up your bum too much, but when I did a shoot for Grant, which went horribly wrong, I was commissioned by Grant to shoot an actress, and I blew it. I got the fear. I did the whole shoot was essentially the same crop, the same situation. And he kindly, and I'm forever grateful for this, took me aside and said, look at this shoot. And he showed me a shoot that I think it was Mark Abrams had done of Antonio Banderas. That's how clearly I remember it. And he ran me through the prints and the contact sheets. And this guy had shot close-ups, wide shots, changed the outfit, changed the aspect, changed the format, color, black and white. And that one thing, I think you taught me more in that one conversation than I'd learned at art school. Do you know what I mean? How do you shoot a photograph? How do you shoot a portrait? And that was so significant to me, and obviously pays dividends years later when you've got that range of imagery. You haven't just got the headshot or the photographer who would do the same, move a fraction to the left, move a fraction to the right. That's not a shoot. A shoot is covering covering as much of somebody as you can, and not just for economic reasons, that obviously you've got all these pictures that can be used in different ways, but just for you to come back to years later and think, my God, I'd forgotten about that one. I'd forgotten, geez, we did that outfit. I'd forgotten about that,
It's
a lifetime's work.
Yeah.
I'll just say that when I did a book 2 or 3 years ago, and when I was going through all the film, a big thing hit me, a difference between digital and film, which was that I'll just talk briefly about the digital. When I think about how I shoot using digital camera now, it's much more like a river. The shoot starts at this point, and then you literally get in a boat and you go down the river, and you're constantly changing, adjusting, tweaking, fiddling with lights and lenses and crops and setups, and you're moving everything around precisely because you can see everything immediately. So you can go, so when I go and look through the shoot afterwards, I've done like 6 frames, and then I can see I've moved the light 4 inches to the right, and then there's 20 frames of that, and then I've moved it a bit more. So by the time I've gone substantially down that river, the shoot is nothing like what it was when we started out. When I looked at the film that I shot in the pre-digital era, everything is pretty much runs to a kind of formula, in that, supposing I shot 10 rolls of film on a subject, the first 6 rolls will be the same setup. It will be, medium format, 12 square camera, 12 frames on a roll. So it's what's that, 72 frames, all exactly the same, because I did a Polaroid or series of Polaroids when we started, and that's what we've settled on. This is how this works. Okay. And then what happens is you just shoot enough film to be guaranteed that you've got at least one frame where they've got their eyes open. Okay. So then I go through the further into the film. So I've got 6 frames, 6 rolls of film like that. Then I've got second setup. Okay. Running out of time now. Your 20 minutes is nearly up. So I've got 2 rolls on a completely different setup, and then 2 more rolls of a third setup at the end, literally where it's like 2 minutes. Let me just try this before you, literally doing it as they're running it, as they're going out the door, trying to get away from you. It's very rigid. It's very rigid and structured, compared to the way we shoot now, the way I shoot digitally. And that's going back to what you were saying, Jake. It is that thing of, a shoot has got, like you said, a shoot has got to be, it can't just be, 96 headshots. You want to see their hands from time to time as well.
James, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I look back on some of the stuff we used to do, and it comes down to budget as well. If you think some of those first jobs, I did a lot of stuff for ID as well as a face, and it's like it's all coming out of your own pocket. And so, I mean, I think I was a little bit different, the way I approach things to Chris. It's like I knew that, all right, I've got an hour with this person, but I've only got 10 rolls of film. That's all I can afford to shoot. So, like, I've got to plan this. I'll have 3 or 4 different lighting setups. I'm going to make sure, like, I do a Polaroid, I do 2 rolls of film of this, and then I'm going to have to switch to the next one, and just pray that you get it. I remember going to the lab the next day, like barely slept, because I'm like, all right, well, I've rolled the dice. I was like, I need to get 4 different setups done. So I hope in those first 20 frames, I got something on this one, I got something on that. And I'm not going to name names, but there's one shoot that I did where I came up with one concept and I rushed it because it was near, as Chris was saying, it's like, all right, you got 5 minutes left, whatever. And it's like, and I still had my final setup to go. So I put a certain pop star in a certain position, like all this, and to this day, I look back and that all of that was slightly out with motion blur, the whole thing. And it's like, if you'd just had the confidence to stick with 3 steps instead of 4, you know what I mean? So there was, and again, but as Chris says, now in the digital world, it all flows. You see how it's going. You know you've nailed one thing, so you can move on, and you move on slightly and you push it. I do find you get in a situation these days, if you've got a lot of people around you watching the monitor and stuff, you have to try and block out some of the opinions and some of the voices that you're hearing, because people are telling you, you've got that, move on. And I've done it a few times where I've had to just like convince people, no, let's pretend you can't see that and let's do this and stuff. But I can definitely remember the one time I moved from film to digital. There was one specific job and I was asked to shoot digital for the first time, and it's pretty harrowing. It's, again, big sort of like pop star sort of American publication, needed the images the next day in New York, so they wanted it all done super fast and stuff, and you're under immense sort of pressure. But all of a sudden, rather than just me seeing a Polaroid, I've got 10 people watching a monitor seeing everything happen and stuff. So it's, I don't know, sometimes
it's giving you pain now, isn't it? I can see
it is. I'm getting anxiety now. I'm flashing back to like Gwen Stefani, basically, as well, saying, and it's like it's a tricky one. And it's there's 2 different sort of worlds, and like there are pros and cons to both and stuff. And I love the process now of digital when I can control this. I've learned now in my old age to control the situation and tell people no, do that. But there were certain times where all the eyes on the screen and everyone had an opinion, and it became tricky. So it was, maybe you were better off when it was all hidden in the back of your film bag and stuff. So
no, I mean, I clearly remember when I first embraced digital. I held out for a while, but there was no way around it in the end. And then 2007, 2008, and I found it incredibly liberating, because I felt the freedom of I always shot on a Mamiya RZ or some kind of medium format. Suddenly having like a camera up to my face again, like with a zoom lens, and I'm moving around, and it was it felt liberating at that point. But I think I ignored film for 2 or 3 years. Then suddenly, not for advertising jobs, because clearly that was never going to fly at that point. But I realized I missed the film, because, like you said, Jake, the mystery, like you're in charge. You do a Polaroid, and maybe you move around, you move on, and everyone has to just roll with it, including you. And I think at the beginning, when I was shooting digital and went back to film, I'd somewhat lost my nerve a bit of trusting my eye, trusting the fact that it was going to be good, because it had been all those years when that was the only way to do it. And now I love on an editorial shoot, when in the infrequent times they occur, I've got both going. You'll shoot some digital, get it to a point where you like it, and then let's bung in a couple of frames of film. Let's do a little bit, and you end up essentially with 2 shoots. First of all, because you've got the digital one immediately, and you can look at it, edit it that night if you've got the nerve to actually sit and look at what you've just done. But you have to wait a couple of days for the film, by which time you've probably done an edit on the digital, and you see the film, and it's like, oh my God, this is kind of a different shoot. And I'm still joyfully wrestling with that. Is dichotomy the right word, Chris? I'll defer to you on that. But it's hard, and it never. I don't know. Like, I'm sure with you guys, you're the same. It never gets really easy. I've never hit a point where I'm like, I've got this piece of cake now. I know exactly what I'm doing in every shoot. Every shoot, there's the same amount of stress, pre-shoot anxiety. And I remember, to quote the Paul Weller interview I read about him, saying, before a show, he would literally do anything to be anywhere else in the world. And once he's on stage, he doesn't want to be anywhere else. And I really feel the same with shoots. You know, before the shoot, I'm like, God, I want this to be over. I can't do this anymore.
Can it be
as soon
tomorrow?
as I start shooting and it looks all right and I'm happy and the subject's all right, it's like, I want this to go on forever. This is the best day of my life, you know?
But I think it's really interesting, guys, because what we're primarily talking about, and I think the majority of the work, if I'm right, in the Farringdon shop is editorially based. And one of the things I've argued with a lot over the years with people is that this use of the word commercial, as if because it's editorial, commercial photography, therefore you're not given any freedom as a photographer, that you know that it's all controlled and it's not that horrible. I never refer to photography as art, but art photography. And now here you are using that work you created that you got paid for. Well, obviously, James, you didn't because you were working for ID, but everybody else got paid. And now people are actually buying it to put it on their walls. I think there's a real interesting turnaround there.
And I think it's something that I should have been conscious of, like knowing, like Chris said, you know, growing up with Bailey, Avedon, you know, they're a lot of those shoots were done for magazines, but they are now perceived as inverted commas art, and they are sold for insane amounts of money. I don't think I at the time was conscious that I was creating an archive. Not, I mean, and again, ultimately it's only for myself, I suppose, but also for people who want to look at pictures of people they admired. And, you know, the longer we go on, the more people we've photographed who sadly pass away. And those pictures become an icon of the time and the person. And I remember thinking, you know, fairly early in my career that the main goal of any photographer is to take the photo that when that person dies, that's the photo that's used to memorialize them, which is kind of morbid in a way. But I think, yeah, I think all of us were somewhat unaware that this second life of these pictures was something that would have an impact on our personal lives and be able to be used as a medium to be put on the wall.
I mean, I've said that, you know, after doing it for this long, this many years, you come to realize that ultimately your ultimate employer is posterity. That's who, although you're working for ID or the Face or, you know, Tatler or whoever, in the end, in the long arc of history, it's posterity that's hiring you. And that's sort of what we do. It's one of the things that always makes me feel awkward when I'm photographing people who are creative people, you know, musicians, actors, writers, people like that, people whose work really does live in the now. They often treat you like a thief. You're kind of made to believe that you're there to you know, to take their soul away, or, you know, all of that stuff. You know, you come here. We're just a room full of musicians trying to make music, and you come here trying to get your photos, you know, so you can print them in your little magazine. You know, and you kind of have to put up with that. And then 30 years later, you bump into the same people who say to you, "Oh man, I'm so glad that you came down that day to document us." And I'm like, and it's taken you 30 years to realize how grateful you are for my existence.
Come on,
And
Chris, you've got to let it go. You've got to let it go.
someone actually wrote me an email saying exactly that a few years ago. You know, saying, "I'm sorry I was so horrible to you at the time and so suspicious of you and untrusting. And it's only now I realize how glad I am that you were there." You know, so worked out in the end.
But I think what you've done there by taking control of your own archive, because I hear from a lot of photographers who don't know what to do with their archive, or they're looking for a museum to buy it, or something. Or alternatively, I hear a lot from photographers who say, "But what's going to happen? My kids aren't interested in it." You know, but you're taking control of it. So how do you find that? Is that affecting your work as well, James, with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I mean, it's with. I mean, Jake and I started talking about this, and and it inspired us to start looking at our stuff again. And now, as you say, we'll go back and look at stuff from 20 years ago, and like you'll find different stuff, and you'll realize the edit then was different, and it affects me. I think now, when I turn up to a shoot now, it's like I'll be thinking, oh yeah, last week I was looking through that old shoot of Radiohead or something, and I did this or did that. It gives me the confidence to go back to those naive days of like, all right, I can shoot, in a different way or a little bit more fluid than this, because an awful lot of my work at the moment is with TV and film studios, and you get a PDF of 25 things you have to cover, and they need that, they need all of that, and it's really refreshing to have gone through an old archive and realize, oh, I can think outside of the box, and it gives me the confidence to push that on a set where I'm not supposed to. But again, back to the time restraints, probably just for 2 or 3 minutes. But this idea of coming back to stuff that has been in dusty boxes, like Jake and I joke about this, rummaging through cardboard boxes in the garage or is in basement and stuff. And it re-inspires you. I think you realise there's gold in them there hills. You know what I mean? You can find stuff that you didn't see before, and it triggers something to make you reassess how you approach shoots you have coming up. So I think it's been pretty cathartic in what we've been doing. And again, back to the photographers who don't know what to do with their archive or what to do with it. It's like we decided to do this more because we missed the social aspect, and it's the reminiscing and all of that. And the print shop has become a byproduct of that because it's just a nice place to put it all. And we realised that some people do want to see it. And so it's been like therapy at us, Grant.
oh no, things are going really bad now. But
it's cheaper than therapy. So.
Yeah.
I mean, can I just say one other thing about this, which is that I think it goes in 25 to 30-year cycles, in that people become nostalgic for the things that they enjoyed in their youth. So in their teens and early 20s, and then by the time they're in their mid to late 40s into their 50s, they become nostalgic for that time in their life. It's also, without wanting to sound cynical, it's also a time where they might possibly have some money to spend for the first time. So you get people. I get quite a lot of people contacting me for things. But I would say mainly music stuff. I love that band. Oh God, it was the first, it's where I met my wife, or where I met someone, or where I did this or where I did that. It reminds me of a great time in my life. I'd love to put that on my wall. I feel the same about seeing other people's pictures, of a period in my life when I was younger, and I think I wouldn't mind having that on my wall as well.
Is this the beginning of an enterprise? Is it? Jake and James, you brought Chris on. Are you looking out for other 90s photographers to bring to the therapy room?
To therapy session? Yeah, I think I've always tried to sort of call it a collective. It's like we called it Farringdon Print Shop, and because it rings so true is because that was EC1, that area of London was where I met these two. It's where I've got my first jobs. I came down to London a week after finishing college in Wolverhampton, and I learnt more walking around the streets of Farringdon than I did 3 years of college. And I met so many people who, my peers, who have helped me out in the day. I mentioned Jake earlier. Chris, actually, when he was in New York, let me kip on his floor. The first few jobs I had for Spin magazine and Rolling Stone, I flew myself out there, and he very graciously let me sleep on his sofa or whatever. So I feel it's like a collective. It's like there are other people from that time that we used to share cups of tea next to the processing machine and stuff. And
we had separate cups though, didn't we? We didn't share one cup.
Well, what, in your flat or in yeah?
Definitely have more than one cup in my flat.
But I think we like the idea, I think, of bringing on other people, and it's what Chris was just saying about he looks at other people's work and goes, I wouldn't mind that on my walls. It's like when we brought Chris on, it's like there's particularly, I think it's your REM picture of like Michael Stipe. I love those ones. I remember, like, I think we were in LA same sort of time you were shooting that lot, and I think was that Sunset Marquee room, or it was one of those places, wasn't it?
Sunset Market.
Yeah,
No,
what was it?
the Chateau Marmont.
Shatter. Yeah, I think I was sat in the bar waiting to meet you afterward. You know what I mean? It's like, so those images, I love the images, but also, again, it's nostalgia. It triggers a story and a time in our lives. And I think there's a whole bunch of us. So we would happily, sort of, we'll consider other people. Chris was the first obvious choice because we both know him so well and we really like his work. And, we're often chatting to him. So, but yeah, to answer your question, Grant, yeah, I would like it to be more of a collective, a social club of 90s aging sort of grumpy old photographers from London, basically.
Well, I think you're slightly underselling it there. I've got to say, I think it's difficult having these conversations because we are all of an age. We were there at a certain time. We are nostalgic in some ways, although even just the mention of the Chateau Marmont takes me back and reminds me of things that happened there that I really won't be including in this podcast. But I think it's important also to recognize that photography has moved on. That's okay, but that it is possible for photographers to take control of that archive, take control of the situation, and actually make something happen for yourselves now, as the environment is and the landscape has changed.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that's true. And I think, so just to backtrack a touch, I think, all of us got into the industry because we were fans of magazines. We were fans of the music.
God, yeah.
And suddenly we were able to meet people that we'd listened to, only a couple of years before, or even contemporaneously. I think, Chris's Verve shoot is absolutely one of those kind of moments where he was documenting something that he was really into. And it shows in the pictures. And I think a lot of us, we were really fans, and I think a lot, and not just of musicians, but we got to meet actors, writers, politicians. Not my favourites, let's face it. But I think the nostalgia is definitely not kind of melancholy. I think the three of us are fortunate that we are still working photographers, and we've seen people come and go. We've seen people come and soar far higher than us, and it's to place yourself in that hierarchy is probably a waste of time. But we've just really, I think all three of us are super happy that we are still making a living from photography. So looking back isn't sad. It doesn't make me long for those days. It makes me so happy that we were there and did it, and makes me look forward to the next shoot. And I look back at stuff I did when I really didn't know what I was doing, and I'm actually, this is pretty good. What? God, even then I was doing all right. Now I know what I'm doing. Surely I can keep this up and maybe do it better. But and I think with age comes, we've all mellowed a bit. Probably back in the day I was like bloody Chris Floyd. But now I'm so pleased he was there doing what he did. And bloody Dimmock, how has he done that? But I think obviously we've mellowed a little bit, and we've got more of a perspective on what we achieved and how we achieved it. And we're still looking forward, I think, in our old age.
Jake, you may not be that much of a fan of politicians, but I think you've just given a particularly good political speech there. On behalf of the photographic movement, we shall immediately go out and storm the barricades, just as we did in that post-punk period. Listen, guys, thank you so much for sparing the time. And it's great to hear your passion is still there for that thing that we've all been doing for a very long time.
I'll finish on this, which was my dad. My dad is 82 and he's a retired chartered accountant. And he said to me once, the difference between what I do and what you do is that nobody ever looks at my work again 5 minutes after it's been completed. And with what you do, people will continue to look at it for a long time to come. Not just me, but I mean, photographers as a rule.
That's a lovely, lovely thought. Lovely
Good one, Dad.
Credit that to Alan Floyd.
There we go.
Thank you, Alan Floyd, an unexpected guest this week. Listen, guys, thank you so much for the time, and I'm sure I'll be catching up with all of you at some point over the coming months.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Thanks, James. Thanks, Chris.
See you
Thank you.
guys.